Good evening, this is Gary Kavanagh here on the right side. I am back with my friend and colleague Michael Dwyer, who is, as I said in the last episode, a whimsical man. And he has whimsically wandered back to the show. We are on Gript. Today is Wednesday, the 2nd of the 10th, and here is the news. Joe McHugh is going to be one of the rare politicians we have praised on this podcast due to his historical moves. Charlie Flanagan remains a politician we say negative things about for his disappointment. Paul Murphy is starting a new party called Rise. And finally, the Green Party wants to reintroduce the wolves and reintroduce the trees, presumably as part of an anti-poverty measure which will lead to the homeless being eaten. I mean, it's a reduction in carbon. That's the real truth of the green movement, Michael. We have too many people.
We do.
So, do you want to talk about Joe McHugh and his decision?
I think that on those rare, happy occasions that politicians and members of the government do something which I think is a good thing, and then they deserve to get a good boy treat and a pat on the head. And today, a good boy treat is being sent out to Joe McHugh along with a pat on the head. He has made the decision in the face of fairly insistent and consistent advice from the National Curriculum Advisory Authority that history should not be a compulsory subject. It should not be a core subject. He has said no. History is going to stay in schools. It's going to be compulsory, if not mandatory, up to intercert. So everybody would have to do some history, quite a bit of it. So no, I don't say it wasn't just the NCA and probably the minister's advisors within the department who would have been hacking away at history. We know the Labour Party is antithetical towards it because this idea hatched first in the nest of the Minister for Education when said minister was Rory Quinn. It had previously been attempted back in the days of Niamh Breathnach, when Niamh was the Minister for Education in the 94-97 Fine Gael Labour coalition government. Obviously, of course, history quite safe in the hands of the soldiers of destiny, but not so under the blue shirts. But Joe, decent Donegal man with a strong sense of his own history, has come out and said no. Quote, he says in The Independent, he's quoted rather in The Independent, "I made history compulsory so that future generations can learn how to avoid the mistakes of our past." Now, sadly, Joe is completely off and off point, off his rocker and out of the park on that. There is absolutely no hope that future generations can learn about avoiding the mistakes of the past, because that's what we do. We learn nothing from it. But there are things we can learn from history. It doesn't have to be how not to do the same things. We are human beings. We are set in the ways of our species. But there are certain things. For example, Gary, as I have said to you before, and perhaps on other occasions, dear listener, you know, when we watch those videos from our cousins across the Atlantic, do you remember the protests of the woke students in Yale? And there was one young African-American woman, who was screaming, and I mean screaming, I'm not saying that without screaming, like she was in pain and in terror about the fact that every day of her life she had to negotiate Yale, which was this horribly racist place where her life, her actual life, her personhood, her right to exist was constantly being challenged. Now, if you are so decoupled from reality and the anchor of history so far from you that you are living so completely in your own present that you can mistake Yale for somewhere which is a bastion of prejudice and hatred and a dangerous place for you to be, then you desperately need an injection of history. And I think that's the great thing that history gives us. It's not a capacity to learn from our mistakes, but rather a reminder, if nothing else, that other people have existed at another time in the same place as us, who looked and sounded maybe like us, but had radically different lives. And perhaps a modicum of generosity and a modicum of gratitude might be the response to our current lives, rather than some kind of hysterical plea for more, sir, please.
This debate reminds me of Otto von Bismarck's famous remark that only a fool learns from his own mistakes. I've always preferred to learn from the mistakes of others.
Yeah.
I will say this, the Irish Times does not seem happy about this.
Odd, isn't it?
Carl O'Brien, who's their education editor, has written 3 stories on this today, and 2 of them are negative, and they're saying that this move will decrease options for students. Yeah,
yes.
Any set... Frankly, having exams at all or set topics which must be considered in any subject decreases choice for students.
Making maths or English compulsory up to leaving cert makes...
In one of his articles, he brings up the level of engagement, an TRSI study that revealed major problems with the engagement of pupils at junior cycle level, to which I have to say, who cares?
Yeah.
Like, the point of school is not to be happy. We've got this weird idea now that children must be engaged, and they've got to be happy, and they've got to be active learners. When you look at most of the most highly ranking school systems in the world, they're not designed to make children happy.
No,
they're designed to educate children.
You're very much right. It's interesting, but I think the reference to the Times is interesting because the Independent, on the other hand, is very happy with the change. And
this is probably the only topic in Ireland where I have ever agreed with the opinion of Michael D. Higgins.
What did Michael D. say?
Michael said it was a deep and profound concern that history would not be a mandatory subject. And he said that to be without such knowledge is to be permanently burdened with a lack of perspective, empathy, and wisdom.
I think Michael D. hits nail on proverbial head. And I haven't said that often, but I think he's absolutely right. Yes, they're well expressed. It's funny, though, that there seems to be an ideological issue going on here for whatever reasons. The progressives don't seem to like it.
There is the argument that the more conservative stance on things is largely based on an understanding of what people are like over time, and the idea how difficult it is for societies to change people. And that is sort of tied into history, because you can go back 2,000 years, and you can understand the motivations of people in Roman history or in Greek theory.
Yeah.
They can be different, and there can be some odd cultural things, but the very basic emotional drives and the kind of social interplay is pretty much the same.
Yeah.
So I can see why they wouldn't like it.
Also, it shows how quickly revolutions can take hold, completely destroy the institutions, and in destroying the institutions of a nation, ultimately destroy the nation itself.
That's another thing. I mean, I get the sense from because I've read a couple of articles from a couple of people, and you read it and you sort of go, I would bet this person either doesn't have children or they're in an educate together school.
Yeah.
Which I've heard sometimes referred to as agitate together.
One of the things that I was watching a couple of people on the TV talking about this who were opposed to this move. Now, it's an odd coalition because you got very much these academics of the left, the progressive left, but they're joined in the harangue by IBEC and IBEC's pals who don't want things like history or Latin or music or art to be cluttering up the curriculum when people could be doing technical drawing or extra maths, because apparently that's IBEC knows in its heart what's going to be the desperate need of the Irish economy in 15 years' time. But you're saying one thing is, I think you're saying about this notion that we should have schools or a schooling system where people enjoy and gain pleasure from the prospect even of going to school. It is true. We actually are doing pretty well in the PISA ratings. I think we come in around something like 6th or 7th. Off the top of my head, so I'm open to correction on this, the top 4 or 5 is it's Singapore, Hong Kong. It's Hong Kong, Singapore, McHugh. Finland is the top European country, along with Estonia.
Is that still true even after they went mad?
Yes, it is. I mean, they went mad in the sense that in 2001, PISA published the study saying that the Finns had the best schools in the world, the best education system in the world, and the Finns had never paid any attention to their education system, unlike other people.
But now they did.
And then suddenly they became terrified. It was like somebody had told them, you know that painting you keep in the back room? Yeah. Well, actually, it's by Da Vinci and it's worth 200 million. You couldn't insure it, so people became terrified. There's a very interesting study, which I can never find again, but I read the whole thing, so I don't think it was a dream. But anyway, where people became very worried about what should we have, and they decided to have a look at the Swedish model next door, where the Swedish model was far more interested in the fact that students had a good time, that they liked their teachers, respected their teachers, because they did a study in the aftermath of their discovery that they had this wonderful system, and discovered that Finnish children didn't actually really enjoy going to school. And they didn't like their teachers, and they didn't have a lot of respect for them, even though Finnish teachers, to be employed as a teacher in Finland, you have to have a master's and have to come in the top 10% academically of your year. So they tried out an experiment with a pure Swedish model, a mixed model and a mixed model. In the Swedish parts of the Finnish education system, there is a Swedish minority in Finland, and they have their own schools. And I think it involved 50 schools, so it was a fairly extensive number of people involved. Anyway, they got, we'll say, Hervé Häkkinen, or somebody similarly named, who's the top education guy in Finland, to have a look at the results. And they said, unequivocally, the new system was better. Students were happier. They were more enthused about going to school. They liked their teachers. They were more engaged. He said, these schools are absolutely superior, except in one regard. If you care about your children doing reading, writing, or arithmetic, they're not as good because they just don't do it. But other than that, he was being very dry and being sarcastic, I should point out, just in case people hadn't got that in a Finnish way. And to me, it was fascinating, because you're right, we have become absolutely mired in this notion that children cannot be educated and schools cannot work unless somehow they're having fun. But if you look, I am very sceptical, Gary, you might know more than me, that in Singapore, Hong Kong or Macau, fun is on the agenda of the school day. Long and the short of it is, well done to McHugh. Also, by the way, he made this decision. Now, it is a little bit to be clarified. The devil perhaps will be in the detail, precisely what it's going to be. But he's also said it's going to start from now, rather than, which you could have done for 2 years' time, which meant you would have had 2 years potentially of two years of students missing out on history. So it's going to start immediately. So I think well done, Joe.
Oh, actually, just on the Singapore point, and 2 quick points.
Yeah.
One, I think if you want to maximise children engagement and the fun they're having, you just let them out of school.
Yeah.
Frankly, I think if you're putting them in school, you've already made a choice. You're not going to maximise their fun.
Yeah.
Because the point of parenting is not to be your children's friend. But on the point of Singapore, I do know something about Singaporean schools. Caning is still legal in them.
Really?
Yes. Schools have the full legal authority to exercise responsibility for the disciplines of their students within the context and needs of the school. Only male pupils can be caned.
So sorry, does Singapore have corporal punishment as part of its criminal code?
It does, yeah. They use public caning quite heavily.
Right, there you go. No chewing gum there.
No, well, I mean, and you can be executed for drug dealing. So
yes,
but they are fond
they tell you that on the plane several times.
Because I remember in 2016 there was an incident in a Singaporean school where it turned out that this group of boys had been taking upskirt photos of some of their female teachers. Mm-hmm. And this school pulled 30 students out and called a general assembly and had them all caned publicly.
There you go.
So there you go. That is Singapore. Great school system.
Yeah, well, tough.
So shall we move on from that to Flanagan?
Yes, it's not a good week for the Flanagan. I don't know. He's not enjoying. This is the Oughterard.
He's terribly disappointed.
He is. God love him. He is. It's sad, and he's right to be disappointed. I mean, the people out there are very disappointing, Gary. I suspect the people are going to be very disappointing after the next general election.
And I mean, it must be. So, for those who haven't heard, the situation in Oughterard, where the government had decided, or I don't even know if they had decided, it was rumoured and then it subsequently turned out to be true, that there was plans to open a direct provision centre down there, and the locals started, they held a public meeting, that got into the media, and then they basically protested about it consistently for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And the news came out there, I think, yesterday at this point, that the company who had the tender in to buy the hotel they were hoping to turn into a direct provision centre had withdrawn the tender, and therefore there would be no direct provision centre down there. Now, Flanagan had gotten involved before, saying that locals, I believe the phrase was, had to step back and allow the process to take place.
Yes.
And there was a lot of talk in the media about how there were far-right elements there. Many of the media involved interviewed Joe Lognane, who I wrote a piece about in Gript recently, where I did a little bit of a dive into his past. So if you haven't seen that and you want to know a little bit of Mr. Lognane, I would just type his name and Gript in, and you will get a lovely summary of his past.
Yes, lovely man.
Yes, so yeah, there was talk about how the far right were doing things while people from the far left were there, and in many cases were being asked on their views on the far right, which was at least fun. And now it looks like the protest worked perfectly. Of course, the interesting thing is there's never any direct provision centres in rich urban areas because they don't protest, they just go immediately to the courts.
Wasn't there one proposed in Ballsbridge?
Yeah, and that was a disaster. They just went to the courts immediately.
They just went straight to the High Court.
And the problem, there is a bit of a problem here for the department, because the department does not consult with anyone on this. So basically, the locals won't be told what's happening. They will find out at some stage, because rural communities and the community is going to find out. And then, because there's no information, they will make a decision without that information or on partial information. But the department says if they tell people, then the people protest. So they don't tell people. But now the people protest, and they don't trust the government when the government eventually gives them the figures.
But they don't trust the government. But God, I mean, imagine that.
I mean, shocking things.
Yeah, I don't think... Tell the people. I think what the department has to do is start asking the people. In the sense that, first of all, you give them as much information as you have. You're as honest and as open as you can be. But also that you give the process time. All of these things are done far too quickly. They're done at night, they're done under the cover of darkness, and they're done in attempted secrecy. Rarely successfully, but they attempt secrecy. And of course, if you have no other information and you see people behaving in what would be characterised like a furtive and underhand manner, you're going to assume that they're doing something which is bad and underhand. You have to explain to people, go through it, introduce some of these people, get them to meet them, humanise the subject. Now, it's also true, by the way, the comments on the critique made by the Oughterard people, who in rather nice spin on it, which I think somebody there must have been, has a bit of media service. They weren't actually protesting about the provision of accommodation services in Oughterard. What they were protesting, Gary, was the system of direct provision itself, which they...
And the inhumanity of it.
They think it's inhumane and iniquitous, and they don't want one in their town adding to the problem, continuing and perpetuating the horrible treatment that asylum seekers in Ireland get. Now, they have a point. The direct provision, we've talked about this many, many times. Direct provision has to be tidied up. There's no reason why the whole thing shouldn't be done and dusted within a year to 18 months.
Now, I did think it was interesting because people are reporting that Flanagan has said he's incredibly disappointed and grossly misleading comments have been made in relation to this matter. Yeah. But have you seen what he actually said, the full sentence?
Go on.
So, what he actually said was grossly misleading comments have been made about the nature of direct provision services in the state. the nature of the services, which have improved steadily over many years, have been totally mischaracterised. So Flanagan is actually now out defending direct provision and the humanity of it, which is frankly not a place I can think many politicians would want to be. But it was a wonderful spin they put on it, because Oughterard was on social media and in actual media pieces. The people there were openly referred to as racist.
Yeah. It was assumed that axiomatically you could just say, okay, these people are racist.
Yeah, these people are clearly racist. They could have no other concerns about this, or the fact it seems to be done in secrecy, or they could have concerns about what this would do to their community. No, it's pure. Even the Examiner today described the situation there as a weeks-long racism row.
Yeah, well, that's the Examiner.
No, that is the Examiner.
Which has just turned into the Times tabloid version.
But it's, it was a delightful spin, the sort of, well, we're not complaining about the asylum seekers. We're complaining about the government's policy.
They trumped the humanity card. They played even more humanity. Now, it's again funny that all of these members of the Irish far right are milling around at these things, getting involved and stirring people up, and yet nobody seems to have been able to spot any or nail them down or interview them. Now, bar of course those rare exotic individuals that are already known to exist, such as Justin. See, Justin got a milkshake.
I did. The only thing I thought about that is, and I'm not a fan of Justin Barrett. I don't know him personally. I just don't have much time for him. Is he got milkshaked and he didn't leave?
No.
So all that makes me think is slightly more of Justin Barrett, because I kind of figured he'd run off with his tail between his legs. Mm-hmm. And that's that weird thing when people are like, milkshaking is not assault because it's not intended to harm, it's intended to humiliate. I mean, firstly, legally it is assault, and it's clearly so. But the thing about milkshaking someone to humiliate them is it's only humiliating if they allow themselves to be humiliated.
Exactly.
And if they just take it, clean the face off a bit, and keep going, it's no longer humiliating. You're just a fascist who likes throwing things, and they're just quietly standing up to you.
Yeah.
And do you remember before the last European elections in Britain, the Brexit Party started passing around a video of one of their candidates, who I think was like an 80-year-old veteran.
Yeah.
And with milkshake down one side of him saying he'd been milkshaked.
Yeah.
And you were looking at that and going, there is no way they didn't get at least a couple more votes because of that. Mm-hmm. And you knew it was a problem because the people on the left who were very in favour of milkshaking started going, well, that's fake. That's not real at all.
Yeah.
And you sort of go, well, even if it's not fake, you very happily would have done it. So I think it's fair to assume it's real.
No, the point you make about the humiliation is an important one, and absolutely right. Humiliation resides not in the act, but in the manner in which the person bears a response to the act, and there it becomes a kind of the humiliation is in a sense transitive. If you spit on the wrong man, the humiliation now resides to you, and I think that's well.
I don't think they realise the idea of dignity.
Yeah, but see, they don't think. I think they genuinely can't imagine that somebody like Justin Barrett, who they have categorised absolutely and fought into a box, and this is it, and that's the only place that Justin will ever be to them. And I'm not a fan of Justin's in the sense, I don't know the man from Adam, wouldn't know him from a hole in the wall except for his picture, but I mean his policies, and that's not my politics. However, he's a human being with the facets and the attributes of human being. Without going into the Hamlet quote, he's all that stuff going on for him, but I think they genuinely. It's fascinating. The other is such a constant theme of the language of the academic left since the Second World War. The notion of the other, of othering, and yet it seems to me that is precisely what they're doing in recent years when it comes to anybody that they want to disagree with or they want to disengage with. They don't want to engage with them. They want everybody to just disengage and cover them over and hide and put them into a dark place because they do not see in them a reciprocal spark of humanity.
I mean, I have legitimately seen people on the left in Ireland, what we say the far left, arguing that nothing you do to a fascist is actually violence.
Yeah, I've seen the same.
Nothing, including physical violence. So you have people coming out and saying, speech is violent if you say things we don't like. But violence is not violence if it's done to people we deem deserve it. And you know, they constantly bring out this paradox of tolerance thing, which is, again, is not a paradox at all. It's Karl Popper's idea that if a society is unlimited tolerance, then the intolerant will take it over. And you sort of, they bring that up, and then you sort of go, okay, let's assume that's true. You're arguing that someone's rights, their legal right not to be assaulted, is purely determined by whether or not you like what they're saying. So surely if we're going to remove those who are saying things that are dangerous to society, you're probably fairly high up that list yourself.
If we're talking history and learning from anything, it baffles me and genuinely that somebody who's putting forth these notes, that kind of perspective, which is to say that they are a group of people like them, can be successfully arbiters to morally distinguish between the kinds of violence that should and shouldn't be allowed within a society because they have some kind of special virtue. That rather than to say, no, this kind of violence, is to be solely within the power of the state and administered within a framework of rules which we call the law. That if they can't recognise it, to take on that kind of arbitrary use of power is so dangerous, and it always ends badly. Can you think of a single situation in the history of Europe in the last 1,000 years where a group of people going out in the full belief of their moral superiority and their and spiritual purity in order to enforce their views on other people that and ignore the law, that has come out and everybody go, you know what, actually that worked out fairly well. The Jews. I mean, the Jews were charging interest, and they were upsetting people, and who needed them anyway? I mean, we can get our own cattle dealers in. Yeah, I'm sorry. That kind of, I don't think so.
Actually, speaking of history, the one I particularly like is the one you hear from the Antifa, the anti-fascist, and the sort of, and the need to physically resist. And if the Nazis had been physically resisted, you wouldn't have had World War II, because it's so wonderfully ahistorical. Because when you study history, the thing you see immediately before the Nazi Party come to power is this long-running period of open street battles between the communists, the Nazis, and the anarchists in various configurations. And one of the major things the Nazis promised when they were going for election was that they would bring stability. They would stop that from happening.
They would impose peace on the street.
Yeah, and it's one of the things we in the West don't understand, because the countries are so peaceful. If you take stability and safety away from people, there are very few things they will not give you to get that back.
That's absolutely, yeah. And it's amazing how quickly the old nostrums will fade if you produce a period of any length of time where people do not feel safe. 6 months, a year of that kind of activity where people don't feel safe. It's amazing what you can get them to vote for. Now, talking of anti-fascists, one of Ireland's leading anti-fascists and anti-Nazis has gone and formed himself a new political party.
A new political party. And you know what, Michael? I've got to say this. I often say that there are no people with ideas in Irish politics. And in general, I think that's true. But I have read the document that came with the launch of Murphy's new party.
Yes.
And I've got to say, there are ideas in that document.
Oh, it's chock full of ideas, Gary.
Now, it does say that we should nationalise the grocery sector. And if you had asked me, is nationalising Lidl and Aldi a good idea? I would say no. But it is, by dictionary definition, an idea.
It's not. It's an idea. It's a big idea. Yeah.
I do. Do you know what I actually personally loved? The fact he wants to double corporate tax, but then he wants to nationalise nearly every company.
Yeah, and those points are almost side by side. And I can't quite work out, does he think, keep pushing the taxes up so far that these companies are failing anyway, so they'll have to be nationalised?
But it's just, it's a bit of a weird thing, isn't it? Of just, we'll get them to pay twice as much to the government, but the government will own them. To which you sort of go, but doesn't the government have all of its money already then?
But the nationalisation of the grocery thing I was particularly interested in, because a friend of ours, and a friend of the Edmund Burke Institute, Robert Miller, for many moons toyed with the idea of writing a novel on a kind of, I don't know, is it a dystopia, but an alternative history, describing a society where the provision of healthcare was operating in an absolutely free market, but that groceries were supplied by the state. So it kind of an inversion of the current situation. And now we could see what would happen. It would be interesting. We could finally discover what would we be, as Milton Friedman said, would we see a situation where eventually we would have a shortage of sand in the Sahara? I suspect we would.
How many left-wing parties are there now? And groupings?
Okay,
we're at least into double figures.
Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil.
And not if you include Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil.
In my little bit of politics there. A little bit of politics.
Very, very droll.
Yeah, I know. Okay, sorry. Okay, Labour, Social Democrats, Socialist Party, Ferrets Before Butter, Anti-Austerity Alliance,
Green Party,
Social
Democrats,
Labour. That's it.
Independence for Change.
Sinn
Féin.
Sinn Féin, that's 9. Well, then are we only talking?
No, there's definitely Solidarity.
Oh, Solidarity. I think I said Solidarity. Then there are other parties that are just not represented necessarily in the Dáil and stuff. Aim to.
True, left wing.
Aim to.
Though the left doesn't like to consider them.
No, but they are. They're of the left. You have the Irish Revolutionary Socialist Party, brackets Trotskyist wing, and then you have the Irish Revolutionary Socialist Party, brackets Marxist-Leninist. You have the Irish Communist Party, and all these sorts. You've got.
I suppose there's.
You got 10 anyway, probably in the Dáil.
I was going to ask, is there a Stalinist branch of that party? But then I thought, no, not if the Trotskyite branch is still around.
Yeah, no. The
Night of the Long Ice Picks.
Does RISE stand for anything?
Oh, it does, Michael. Of course it does.
What does it stand for?
So, I heard it, and my immediate response was Rural Ireland says enough.
Okay.
But it actually stands for something radical, internationalist, socialist, and environmentalist.
Oh. Where can I join? He's ticking all the boxes for me.
I don't think they have a website up yet, but presumably that when it goes online.
I think I might drive to Dublin tomorrow and join. Because it sounds like it was direct. It was built with me in mind.
I actually didn't realise Rural Ireland Says Enough was gone. I still see the stickers around the place.
Maybe it's not gone. Maybe it's just fading away. But can I ask the question, why?
Because the Socialist Party was unwilling to work with other people on the left.
So the Socialist Party does not believe in the old adage, no enemies to the left?
No, but that was, speaking of World War II and Trotsky, that was actually something you saw immediately before the Nazis. Trotsky was writing, as was the Russian Communist Party, to the communist parties in Germany, telling them not to work with the existing left-wing parties, which, with the benefit of history behind us, may not have been a great option.
It's very easy to be wise with hindsight. And, maybe things could have been better, but maybe they would have been worse. You never know. But yes.
That Trotsky, he has his head screwed on right.
Yeah. Right till the end, it was well screwed.
Did he manage to kill his assailant before he died in hospital?
I have no memory. I don't think so.
Because he was writing at his desk. The guy had been working as a gardener, I think.
Yeah, he
came in with an ice pick, put it in the back of his skull. I think he managed to either beat him or kind of restrain him before something like that. But that's neither here nor there. That's just a
I always
Trotsky
had this
fun fact.
I always had this notion as a kid that when the ice pick, I didn't know what an ice pick was. I thought it was like those things that they climb mountains with. Until I saw one once and I realised what it actually was.
It would probably be better to call it an ice axe.
An ice axe. But the ice pick is actually a very thin, long, thin piece of metal. Like it. And I saw that, and I had the notion that he was put in through the ear. And I could never work out how he could how he managed to miss the brain. Why wasn't he just deaded immediately? But no, in fact, he goes in through the back, and I'm sure that was a bad idea.
It went through the back of his skull. I think it went 2 inches into the back of his skull.
See, if you go through the ear, you get an awful lot more brain in there. Wiggle it around a bit.
Do you know what the last words of his assassin were meant to have been?
No.
And he actually died of Cuba in, I think, the 80s, the early 80s.
Yeah.
And his last words are reported to be I hear it always, I hear the screaming, I know he's waiting for me on the other side.
Oh, so religious. There you go. Had a faith. That's nice. Nice.
Yes, so apparently Trotsky screamed a lot after taking an ice pick to the back of the skull.
You say that, Gary, like a judgment, you know.
I've always agreed with the British that one should die with a little bit of dignity.
You know, I think even British members of the General Staff, if they had an axe buried in the back of their head, would.
But he did. I'm absolutely sure after he took it, he screamed and then started fighting with him, until his bodyguards arrived.
That could well be the case. But I think I'll forgive him the screaming.
Well, I mean, if we must.
The killing the hundreds of thousands of innocent Russians during the civil war after the Bolshevik Revolution, I might be a little bit more...
Michael, you can't make an omelette without breaking some eggs.
Yeah, but as has been observed many times, the problem with the Soviet Union was they had neither eggs nor omelets at the end of the process.
Well, that was Orwell's famous quote when someone said that to him, and where exactly is the omelette?
I remember, I don't know why it reminds me, somebody there was talk in the immediate aftermath when Fine Gael were coming to power, after the great crash here, and they talked about a great stimulus package. And somebody asked me my opinion, to which I responded that a stimulus package in an economy like this is much like pissing in a colander. You don't keep the piss and you ruin the colander. Anyway.
I do legitimately love the last words of Trotsky's assassin. Like, how terrified do you have to be of Trotsky to have that as your last words?
Yeah, I remember. And the thing about that is, Trotsky, for so many people across the world, was portrayed as the nice guy. Not like that nasty Stalin guy.
Yeah, he killed all those people, but he felt terrible about it afterwards.
And also, he was fundamentally an internationalist in a way that Stalin wasn't, which somehow, for some reason, was supposed to make things better. I don't know why that's the case, but the fact that he was an internationalist was better. Anyway, we leave Paul and his party to rise, and I'm sure they will. But there is a
wolves.
Wolves. The wonderful plan here. The Greens want two things. They want every farmer in the country to be paid to plant a hectare of trees, which is around what's a hectare? 2.5 acres?
You would know better than I do.
I believe it's 2.5 acres or something like that. And they want to bring wolves back. Now, I'm all for planting the trees. I'm a big fan of this techno-fix version of carbon capture. Plant lots and lots of lovely trees all over the world so we can just get on with our lives without worrying about carbon capture or being sent packets. But the wolves, Gary, I don't know.
I will say this. I actually like both of these policies. I have not read the papers or the bill, and I absolutely trust the Green Party to have written them in such a way that I will go into them going, I agree with this, and leave afterwards going, this is total insanity.
Yeah.
I did like the way Eamon Ryan described the country.
Mm-hmm.
He said that the way culture grows trees, where they grow them up and cut them down, which I think is actually quite problematic because of the types of trees that they actually plant.
Yeah.
He said it left the parts of the country, large parts of the country, looking like Verdun during World War I.
Well, I have seen some of the clear felling that they've been doing, and he's not wrong.
No. He's not right as such, but it's not the worst.
Yeah, he's not right in the sense that mixed in with all the muck and the mud and the tree stumps are not thousands of human bodies.
No,
rotting.
I mean, there aren't horses slowly sinking into craters of mud, screaming as they drowned.
And rats the size of Labradors dancing across the scene. No, but it's not a pleasant scene, and it's all for trees which have absolutely very little economic value and no recreational value at all.
There is something they say here. They point out that they want to expand the legal mandate of culture, which, for those who don't know, is the state forestry company, to be overall so that it goes beyond commercial forestry to general tree conservation and restoration of woodlands. I would be interested in seeing what their argument is there, but I don't think that policy is absolutely nonsense to start with.
Except Quilcha, to my knowledge, I don't know if I'm going to trust Quilcha to run bits of woodland in forest that it hasn't already got its hands on the basis that the experience we've had with them so far has been Quilcha, like the rest of the forestry, has been planting basically
spruce,
Sika spruce. It's not even spruce. I mean, if they're planting, I don't know, Scots pine, or or some lovely maybe alpine pine from Liguria, which you can get pine nuts and make very nice food. But they're not. They're planting Sika spruce. You know, I don't imagine you've been in one of these forests, Gary. They plant them so tightly that literally there is no sunshine can get through the upper canopy. So the bottom of it, also the soil is acidulated because of you've got this bed of pine needles, which also doesn't burn because there's nothing to burn it. There's no light, so there can't be photosynthesis. So there are no, basically there's no undergrowth. So there's nothing to feed on. So you don't have squirrels, you don't have insects, you don't have voles or pine martens. You have no birds. There's nothing. You're just this black, dead thing. And since we're doing this essentially as a moral exercise, because we have a very low rate of afforestation in Ireland, with lots of trees that you can see, but no forest, big forest like they have in Germany or France or England. So we do this as a moral exercise. We say we want forests. Since we're not doing it to make money, let's plant nice ones. Oak and sycamore and beech and larch and have spaces between them and have red squirrels and pine martens and eagles and owls and lovely things. Let's have boar. Can we have wild boar?
I mean, you say that purely because you want to hunt and eat them. What? Actually, no, sorry, you want to eat them and pay someone else to hunt them.
Well, yes, I do want to eat them. I very much enjoy eating. Wild boar is delicious.
I've never actually had wild boar. I hear very good things.
I remember having wild boar pate in a little restaurant outside Salzburg once. Is it hard? It's pretty hard to imagine a more poncy sentence than that. Eating wild boar pate in a small restaurant outside Salzburg.
I've said worse.
Maybe on the Oberside. Anyway, it did actually happen and it was delicious. The Italians do these lovely stews with it to make it put on pasta. It's gorgeous. And I don't know. As long as if I'll hunt it, if you put me in one of those hides up in the trees where it can't get at me. Because a wild boar, charging sort of a boar with the big tusks that's grown up, they can do you a lot of damage. If they get you
they are not small animals.
If they get you on the ground, if they get you down, they will do a lot of damage. But wolves, I'm not so sure. I think the Scots are looking at this. I think we should leave it to the Scots. See how that goes, because a wolf will walk a long way.
I mean, I see two primary issues with this. Yeah, one, wolves are they really roam quite far, so you're going to lose livestock because that's Ireland.
Yeah.
And two, we did have, remember the eagles, Michael?
Yes.
Remember we tried to introduce various types of eagles, and they just kept getting shot and poisoned.
Yeah, well, again, what you have to do there is do what we did eventually with the eagles and provide sufficient economic incentive for the farmers to pretend that their stock has been killed by the eagles rather than kill the eagles. You're always going to have poachers and you're going to have bad guys who try to take the eggs. But the golden eagle reintroduction has actually been pretty successful in Donegal. It's happening in Kerry. We are seeing the return, for example, of all sorts. We've kites coming here now. We've buzzards coming. Lots of buzzards actually. The last few years, suddenly, far more birds of prey around the gaff. So I don't know. I think it's a nice idea. Planting the trees certainly, but let's plant nice ones.
Yeah, as I said, I'm not opposed to any of these. I think I've made my views on forestry and the importance of it quite well known. And actually, I think I've openly said on this show a couple of times we should reintroduce wolves. But I absolutely, and I will read these bills, or I will read whatever policy document they're going to put out on them. I think it's been debated, or I think there's a vote later in the week on it. I think the debate was actually on Tuesday night, which I missed. And I absolutely trust the Green Party to screw this up spectacularly.
Well, yes, and your faith. I'm sure your faith in them is both touching and not misplaced.
I think of them much like I do the Lib Dems in England.
I don't know.
They go up in the polls, and you sort of go, excellent showing. I can't wait to see how you spectacularly cock this up.
I don't want to mention names, but they're members of the Irish members of the Irish Green Party of an arrogance and incompetence which I think far beyond any arrogance or incompetence the Lib Dems ever showed. And now, while Vince Cable, for example, wasn't, as it turned, wasn't the perfect shadow chancellor, Vince at least had a fairly good handle on the debt problem, and he was predicting apocalypse before anybody else did. Anyway, I think we should leave the boars and the bears and the wolves. Bears would be nice too, and stags and all sorts of things. We'll leave those, but if we're going to put them in Donegal or Kerry, far away from me, but not so far that I can't drive to look at them. And we shall return. When are we back? Sunday? What day is today?
Today is Wednesday. We will be back on Sunday.
Sunday with the week's miscellany. And hopefully we will all have survived the great wind that's coming in from the west. And until then, it's a goodbye from me.
Probably lucky we don't have wolves. They'd be swept away by the waves. And that's not what anyone wants to see.
No, wet wolves.
Wet wolves being swept out to the ocean, screaming like those horses at the start of War and Peace.
Oh, God. Goodbye. Goodbye. And on that, bye-bye.